The burden of expectation and duty in Heaney's life accumulated hugely after his Nobel Prize. Commitments in 2001 included delivering a tribute at R.S. Thomas's memorial service in Westminster Abbey, a 3-day programme devoted to his work in New York, a reading of Beowulf, and visiting South Africa. He was courted by celebrities from Bill Clinton to the Crown Princess of Japan, but he felt a mounting frustration. "All I do nowadays is turn up," he wrote. "I'm not an agent of my own being." That letter typically was written while on a transatlantic flight. The pressure did not relent. The years after the Nobel saw him delivering lecture series and giving readings from St. Petersburg to Hong Kong. The period from 2001 to 2006 closed with the publication of a powerful new collection, District and Circle. A jealously guarded family life and the bolt hole of Glanmore Cottage enabled him to survive great fame. He described driving south to Wicklow between the sea and the mountains. "It opened up. A sudden joy," he wrote, "the flow of the farmland, the sweep of the road, the lift of the sky. There's a double sensation of here and nowness in the familiar place, and far and awayness in something immense." This combination of the immediacy of a loved landscape and the sense of something beyond it continued to haunt his poetry. The work collected in District and Circle was haunted in other ways too, by war and violence and foreboding. The chilling poem Anything Can Happen reflected Heaney's reaction to the attack on the Twin Towers. In the sonnet Out of Shot, the poet leans on a farm gate in winter sunshine, recalling monastic fears of Viking sea raiders in the past and the image of carnage in the Middle East on television the night before. November morning, sunshine on my back, this bell-clear Sunday, elbows lodged, strut firm, on the unseasonably warm top bar of a gate, inspecting livestock, catching gleams of the distant Viking Vic of Wicklow Bay, thinking scriptorium, Norse raids, night dreads, and that fierce raiders poem about storm on the Irish Sea. So no attack in the small hours or next morning, thinking shock, out of the blue or blackout, the staggered walk of a donkey on the TV news last night, loosed from a cart that had loosed 5 mortar shells in the Bazaar district, wandering out of shot, lost to its owner, lost for its sunlit hills. District and Circle appeared exactly 40 years after death of a naturalist. A few months after its publication, Heaney suffered a stroke while staying in Donegal for a party. His recovery was fairly rapid, and the enforced cancellation of all scheduled commitments was a kind of blessing. It also possibly opened the way to new poems of sustained depth and clarity. In certain great poets, Heaney remarked a couple of years after his stroke, you sense an opening of consciousness as they age, a deepening receptivity to what might be waiting on the farther shore. It's like those rare summer evenings when the sky clears rather than darkens. No poet can avoid hoping for that kind of old age. The years after his stroke conferred that expansion of consciousness, accompanied by a certain frailty and periods when he had to withdraw from all commitments. But the power and urgency of the poems he wrote in his last 7 years were undimmed. The love poem Chanson d'Aventure arose directly from his stroke and summons up the terrifying ambulance journey with his wife to intensive care. Apart, the very word is like a bell, that the sexton Malachy Boyle outrolled in Illo Tempore in Balahi, or the one I told in Derry in my turn as college bellman. The hall of it there, still in the heel of my once capable warm hand. hand that I could not feel you lift and lag in yours throughout that journey when it lay flop heavy as a bell pull, and we careered at speed through Dunlow, Glendowen, our gaze ecstatic and bisected by a hooked-up drip feed to the cannula. In 2010, the year that his final collection Human Chain was published, Heaney made an excursion to Wales with his friends Carl Miller and Andrew O'Hagan. They visited the grave of 17th century poet Henry Vaughan at Clansanfred Church. Vaughan's lines about the dead, "They're all gone into the world of light, and I alone sit lingering here," had long hung in Heaney's mind. O'Hagan listened to his friend's conversation. "Well, here's Vaughan," said Miller, "a believer. It's hard to think of you, Seamus, without belief. I find it hard not to believe you believe." "I stopped practicing a long time ago," said Heaney, "but some of it holds. If you have it as a child, it gives you a structure of consciousness, the idea there's something more." "I probably wouldn't go that far," said Miller, "but I always believed I would see my granny again. She was good to me." "For me, my father," said Heaney. "I'd hope to see him again, all right." In the poem Album, Heaney revisits his father's death. He invokes the heartbreaking scene in the Aeneid where Aeneas tries to embrace his father and repeatedly finds the insubstantial form sliding away from him. Were I to have embraced him anywhere, it would have been on the riverbank that summer before college, him in his prime, me at the time thinking how he must keep coming with me because I'd soon be leaving. That should have been the first, but it didn't happen. The second did, at New Ferry one night, when he was very drunk and needed help to do up trouser buttons. And the third was on the landing during his last week, helping him to the bathroom, my right arm taking the webby weight of his underarm. It took a grandson to do it properly, to rush him in the armchair with a snatch raid on his neck, proving him thus vulnerable to delight, coming as great proofs often come, of a sudden, one off, then the steady dawning of whatever erat demonstrandum. Just as a moment back, a son's 3 tries at an embrace in Elysium swam up into my very arms, and in and out of the Latin stem itself, the phantom veris that has slipped from very. A year before Heaney died, Colm Tóibín noted the way he appeared after a reading in Kilkenny. He carried his fame lightly, easily. He preferred shadow to light. He preferred the half-said, ambiguous remark to the big statement. He enjoyed company, but I always felt he had one eye on the door and would be happy when the night was over and he could go home. In late August 2013, already in hospital after a minor fall, Heaney was rushed for an emergency operation on a ruptured arterial blood vessel. He died on his way into the operating theatre on the morning of Friday the 30th of August. His last message to his wife was a Latin injunction, "Noli timere," don't be afraid. Noli timere became Heaney's final manifesto to the nation and to the world, appearing on social media posts and on a gable-end wall in Dublin, lovingly preserved to this day. It reflected the overwhelming impact of his death on a country and a culture. There was an extraordinary outburst of national grief in Ireland, and indeed elsewhere, but especially in Ireland. At the All-Ireland Gaelic football semi-final in Croke Park, a crowd of 80,000 people stood and applauded for 2 minutes in homage. His unforgettable funeral in Dublin was a genuinely national occasion. It was as if all he'd given to his readers came back in a flood of gratitude and grief. Afterwards, the cortege drove north to Balahi and his last resting place. This was the journey from south to north he'd made so many times in his lifetime. The sense of a great tree falling, leaving a silence and emptiness behind, was palpable. Heaney's sister-in-law, the writer Polly Devlin, remarked that he'd preserved and made concrete feelings and sensations anchored in a world now gone. "Who's seen how a coulter breaks ground behind sweating horses?" she asked. "Who knows what measling shins look like, or has put a graith on a horse, or what a scoop sunk past its gleam in a meal tin looks like? Seamus not only knew to his bones these country ways and vanished words, he made them necessary memories." The odd contract Heaney had forged with his readership was based not only on their affection for him as a poet, but on a belief that he recorded something shared and essential, and he could be trusted. This was unusual, not to say unique. The Irish, Dr. Johnson remarked, are very fair people because they never speak well of one another. His friend Carl Miller once suspiciously inquired, "Seamus, are you really as nice as you seem?" Heaney replied equally characteristically, "I've been cursed with a fairly decent set of impulses." His readership were grateful for the way he made vivid the instantly recognizable parts of life. But that mastery of the familiar coexisted with an uncanny ability to conjure up transcendence. "I believe the condition into which I and my generation in Ireland were born," Heaney once said, "involved the moment of transition from sacred to profane, the transition from a condition where your space had a determined meaning and a sacred possibility to a condition where the space was without any emotional or inherited meaning." His gift, and what he did with it, contested this belief. He made emotional and inherited meaning come alive for his readers, and this would continue after him, like the ghost echo left behind in clearances when the tree he'd grown up with was felled. "I thought of walking round and round a space, utterly empty, utterly a source, where the decked chestnut tree had lost its place in our front hedge above the wallflowers. The white chips jumped and skidded high. I heard the hatchet's differentiated, accurate cut, the crack, the sigh and collapse of what had luxuriated through the shocked tips and wreckage of it all. Deep planted and long gone, my coeval chestnut from a jam jar in a hole, its heft and hush become a bright nowhere, a soul ramifying and forever silent, beyond silence, listened for.